So it's been a few weeks since the Foreverwinter closed beta ended, and I'm comfortable now to let you all know my thoughts, and like I've said on a few posts before, answer some questions on things without going too in-depth on spoilers, and keep things close to generalities, just to sort of make sure that Fun Dog Studios is no spoilers and no long-form content is being breached in any way. So to start, I wanted to go over some of the most common questions that I received, and I wanted to also go over some that have been submitted to me specifically, so that I could go over them in this video. With all that being said, the most common question that I've received is whether or not the Foreverwinter will have PvP. The simple answer to that is no. So far, the Foreverwinter is a PvE extraction shooter. The premise of the players and lore kind of goes against the spirit of what the actual game is supposed to be if there was PvP enabled. I don't think that FTS really wants the scavs to have warring factions amongst one another, at least as far as I could tell in the beta. There really was no premise for that. Anything that I could find on information that that was a thing wasn't actually happening. As far as, again, I could tell, there isn't any notion that there was going to be PvP. Some of the people that I've interacted with in the Discord as well and in the community abroad has made it very clear, at least from their perspective, that they don't want PvP in the game either. And I think that that's fine. I don't think every extraction shooter needs PvP elements. I think that this game can definitely survive on its own. Another commonly asked question that I've been receiving revolves around the enemy variety in the game, or lack thereof that was present in the beta. So to speak to that, there are more planned enemies that were not available in the beta. I'm sure that that has to do with the multiple factors, like they aren't present in the maps that we had access to. Some of them weren't ready for actual gameplay testing, which is fine. Again, it was a beta. This game has no release date. It's fine. It's going to be okay. They've come out and said that there are more planned enemies that weren't available in the beta, so I don't think that it's going to be a problem at all. An example of the enemy varieties being kind of limited is I think the only mechs that were available were the medium mechs. So there are large mechs that can happen that have been confirmed to be much larger than the medium mech varieties. And I'm sure that there are small mechs, but again, I don't know whether or not the mech is. It'd be interesting to figure out. There were questions on bots and the mercenary system that you could do. It's pretty underbaked. You could hire the NPC mercenaries and then they would come with you, but they weren't great. They were pretty underbaked. They shot on sight a lot of the time. Other times they wouldn't shoot anything at all until you shot, which I guess is fine. That sort of is probably how it should be. But even if it didn't make sense for them to do so, I remember sending a group of mercenaries into the middle of a pack of Eurasian foot soldiers, and they didn't do anything until I shot them, and then they started shooting, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. They didn't react to either, like, neither group reacted to one another, so it doesn't seem like it's super fleshed out currently, but I'm sure it'll get better. Again, it was beta. It's to be expected that the AI is a little harsh right now, which is fine. I mean, it didn't take away from anything. It was funny. It added some charm for sure. I got a lot of questions on weapon variety. Man, are you gonna have a good time with this? So there are plenty of weapons to choose from and plenty of ammo types. As far as I could tell, there was nothing futuristic other than a giant anti-material sniper rifle that's meant for tanks, which I think actually exists, but I have no idea how actually common or usable that it is in actual warfare. They all performed differently as well, which is good. All of the ammo types and weapons performed differently too, as I think you'd kind of expect. We couldn't use SMGs as the character that we had access to, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not some of the characters can handle the weapons differently than the old man, which is again the character that we had access to in the beta. It'll be interesting to see how that fleshes out the different character progression paths, or whether or not the different characters that you can play handle the weapons differently to figure out whether or not that you want to use specific weapons with specific characters. I will say that the weapon balancing probably needs to get touched a little bit. Some of them were overperforming and some of them were underperforming. A good example that I have is that there's like a kind of futuristic Scar variant that shoots 50 cal bullets. Really odd. I don't know if that exists in real life. And the 50 caliber bullets performed worse than 5.56 bullets. I make the joke that you're basically shooting BBs at people when you hit people with 5.56. It's really not the case, but when you're considering the differences between 50 caliber and 5.56, you're basically actually shooting BBs compared to what it is that you're shooting out of a 50 cal. So yeah, they probably need to address that a little bit. Other than that, like, everything felt good and played well when the gameplay was, was good. The shooting aspect to it is actually good. I don't know how much of it you're supposed to actually do, because again, you're supposed to not take fights every single time. But regardless, there's weapon variety for sure. There's a ton of different weapon types. There's a ton of different ammo types. What's funny is I got a question on some standout map locations that I actually really enjoyed, and I've made a few videos on them about them realistically already. Or at least not necessarily about them, they were just in them. So I actually really liked diving into the stranded mobile base, and I also enjoyed the trenches and battlements. The stranded mobile base was actually super interesting. The interior of it very much felt like a submarine. Everything was made out of metal, everything was super enclosed, there wasn't a whole lot of space for anything. And it just felt like it belonged in the universe that it was in. The trenches and the battlements and the other maps felt like they were actually a part of the war. It felt like they actually had seen warfare, and it looked like they were actually placed strategically to be a part of it. When you walked into enemies that were fighting there or just watching them, it felt amazing to see how it is that they were using the actual trenches and placements to figure it out. Plus, sometimes you would see turrets on the battlements that would take people out. It was really interesting to see. I got questions too on if there are pieces of equipment that you have access to and for abilities that can modify gameplay in any way. There's a few things that you have access to. Obviously, if you're watching this video, you've probably already seen the turrets that you have access to. Those are pretty funny, but they aren't super great. They don't take things out very easily, but again, hilarious. They'll probably make them better. I assume that that'll be the case. There are scanners that'll figure out where the loot is for you, and sometimes I believe it does enemies. I'm not 100% on that. I didn't actually use it. Regardless, it can show you where the loot is, which is it's good to have that as opposed to kind of figuring it out yourself, especially if there are people fighting in an area where you think that there is going to be loot. It's nice to have that so that you don't have to go through that war zone and then figure out, oh, this was useless because there isn't anything here. Finally, I think it's a jump jets. I'm not 100% on what it is specifically. All I know is there's something that you can equip and it makes you jump really high, and I don't think you take the falling damage from the jump, which, was good because there's falling damage. And you can definitely kill yourself doing it. Yeah, there's jump jets. They make you jump super high. I didn't use it. It seemed kind of gimmicky. There wasn't a whole lot of traversal that made sense to use it on, especially because you could climb, but it's still funny to use. It was kind of fun. My friend was using it for a little bit. They also have IEDs that you have access to. They're basically, obviously mines. Those were like basically our anti-tank, sometimes anti-foot soldiers. Usually they're anti-old men bombs though. Most of the time my friend would set them right next to me, either on purpose or on accident, and realistically they would explode any other enemy. Couldn't tell you how that kept happening, because it just kept happening, which was funny, but, can be a little irritating. But you can, obviously use it to take out mechs or tanks, sometimes enemy foot soldiers, I assume. It's basically just a mine. One of the other questions that I received is how much loot is there versus shoot in this extraction looter shooter? Now, I get that that's probably a little weird. I know that it's meant to be more loot than shoot all the time, but it kind of depends on the run that you're doing. For example, you mostly will be looting more than shooting at any given time, but like any extraction shooter, sometimes you'll just come into a run juiced to the teeth and shoot everything you see. Within reason, obviously, you can't take out some of the enemies with basic, like, small arms fire, but if you want to, you can take in a ton of ammo and just shoot every cyborg you see and every foot soldier, and kind of, the more ammo that you bring, the less space that you have though for like loot and other things like healing. So yeah, the more ammo that you bring in, the less space you actually have for loot, both slot and weight wise. Each box of ammo takes up a certain weight, and each box of ammo takes up a slot in your inventory, like the slots. So it's worth not packing super heavy if you can help it. Obviously, sometimes you just want to go out on a fun little run and kill as many things as possible. That's, exciting. But you're not going to bring back a ton of stuff. But again, it's like any extraction shooter. You can kind of pick and choose when it is that you want to do more shooting than looting. And I think that that's probably good. With that in mind, another question that I received is, could you take every enemy out within reason, I assume? Honestly, I kind of highly doubt it. Unless some enemies just have an astronomical amount of health. So you can see the video of me shooting the mama 10 times with a grenade launcher and it not dying, for an example. I don't think you could kill all the enemies nor are you supposed to that, and I am fairly sure most of the enemy foot soldiers are perpetually spawning in, so I don't think you could clear a map if you wanted to, if that's where that question's technically leading, which again is fine. That's not the whole premise of the game. You're not supposed to do that. There's the questions on some special enemies, and I know that there are a few that were available, and their lore is super interesting. I won't go in depth on that because this isn't a lore video, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not a lore expert by any means in the Foreverwinter. But I know that Critical Rocket has some videos out right now that explain some things in depth, and Rilo obviously has some things, and obviously Fundog has their own set of things that they've released, basically. But there are some really cool enemies hypes. I know that there's Toothy. He's really interesting. He's a rogue AI that controls a mech that eats people for biofuel. Really interesting. There are the corpse tanks, which I think nobody understands. They have cyborg corpses aligning the outside of the tank. I assume it's to scare foot soldiers, but if people know that they're not people, then it like doesn't mean a whole lot, I would assume. But they look visually interesting. There's a couple other boss enemies that are really interesting that I gonna be honest, I don't know the name of or have the backstory to, but they're super interesting. So there's definitely some special enemies that exist that provides, I think, certain loot that you have to go after, and then there's quests to take those enemies out. But I don't have a whole lot of information on the lore surrounding them, unfortunately. So I spoke a little bit about this just now. Another question that I received are what objectives there are and what they're like. There were quests available that were pretty bare bones, but it was a beta, so that's to kind of be expected. I would imagine that's one of the least concerns right now. There was a lot of collect and minor kill quests and some orders to kill named targets, like I kind of said. But yeah, there's a lot of fetch quests. Basically, there's a lot of kill this enemy type to get the thing that it drops, and hopefully, you get it within a reasonable amount of time. Some people were stuck on some of the fetch quests for a little bit. I remember the Discord kind of popping off on one of them specifically. But that's being addressed. It'll be fine. That won't be a problem at launch, I assume. Or at least I hope. I would imagine that they probably will fix that before it comes out. It was a big sticking point for some of the beta testers. Another question that I received revolves around the premise of the game that you can observe the battlefield by careful actions and then manipulate them, and then its direction and generally sneak around them. So in the videos that I put out, there's definitely a lot more combat that happens. I definitely pick those because they're primarily action-packed and they're more interesting, at least in terms of how the content is supposed to be consumed. There's definitely more observation and sneaking sequences than there are combat sequences that I've experienced. I just didn't put those out because I felt like it was more interesting to watch. It's not to say that sitting around and watching the actual war happening wasn't one of the most interesting parts of the beta, because it definitely was. I got a question on the home base or the innards, but I mean, realistically, what you do there is obviously that's where you bring all the loot back, you sell it to the merchants so that you gain rep with them so that they give you more stuff. So there isn't a whole lot to do at the home base. It's mostly just traders. I know that you bring back water, and the more water that you have, the longer that you can technically stay alive within the world. And then the more water that you have gives you more access to more traders. I don't know if it'll stay the same. I think that they might do something with the water system. I'm not 100%. At least they should. It was kind of bare bones at the time. There is a donation box, so if you have stuff that you don't use or don't want to use, you can put it in there, and then anybody else who's online at the time can take out of the donation box, and then obviously they can also put stuff in the donation box. So every now and then you can check that to see if there's something that you like that somebody doesn't, and you can take it and then put stuff in the box. It's kind of a neat system. Other than that, that's about the most interaction that there is in the innards. Obviously you can walk around to the different vendors, but they're all in menu too, so you don't really have to do that. But it is visually interesting to walk around and see what's in there, because it's basically the way that the lore is told in the game. Everything is visually said, not a whole lot of exposition. So it's interesting. Going back to weapons a little bit, somebody asked whether or not the customization was fleshed out. It is very good. There's a lot of different things that you can do, and there's a bunch of different attachments that you can put onto the guns, and a bunch of different variants of attachments that you can put on guns. So you can unlock them and buy them. I believe that you unlock more attachments for the guns based off of the gun level, which you get XP for by using it. Obviously pretty intuitive there. There isn't a crafting system as far as I could tell for the guns or the attachments or the weapons or anything. The only way to really gain a weapon is to purchase it, which is probably fair. You can technically find scrapped weapons off enemies that you kill. So most of the time they're broken. Sometimes you can actually pick up usable weapons though and keep them and put them in your inventory. You sell the scrap weapons. So that's basically how that works, how you gain them anyway. And you can lose them. It is an extraction shooter. There has to be some level of loss that you can have. So you do technically lose the weapons when you die, and any like backpack upgrades, rig upgrades. So if you die, you will lose everything, but you'll drop like a tombstone basically. So if you go into the same map the next time, you can get back to where it is that your stuff was, or at least should I say where you died, and there's going to be like a little tombstone that you pick up, and then when you extract from that mission, assuming that you do, you get the gun back and the upgrades that you had for the rig. So that's good. It's not a bad system. It's a little user-friendly. I wouldn't mind, honestly, if you lost the gun. You get so much money so often anyway that it doesn't really matter when you lose stuff. And they have pretty easily set presets for weapons that you actually can customize. So you don't even really have to take a whole lot of time to repurchase all the upgrades. Most of the time, you can just buy the weapon and then select the preset that you have for that weapon, and then you can set it to automatically purchase and equip all of those same attachments that you already set. It's a really good system. It's super easy to get back into the same, like a new raid with the same gun that you wanted or had. So it's not bad. There's a question on AI balancing. It's kind of whatever. Specifically, I was asked, does it get simply too chaotic and oppressive to do anything, or is it easy enough that it's more worth it to risk it frequently and just shoot your way through things most of the time? The AI isn't super balanced towards stealth, if I'm being perfectly honest. I know that you can stealth sections, and there are definitely ways to sneak around and lose sight of the enemies so that you can actually get away from them without having to shoot through them. I found it more interesting to do that, but again, that isn't super interesting gameplay footage, so I didn't show a lot of that. There's a lot of shooting that can happen, and then the AI cyborgs tend to hear things from really far away, and they will run and rush towards gunfire at a pretty alarming rate, to the point where you do get overrun if you don't try to shoot your way out, and then they're faster than you, so even if you did run, they would catch up to you, so you do kind of have to pick and choose your combat zones a little bit. You can go from like the combat pockets in a different dynamic way. You don't have to take fights, and you can watch the fights progress. So it is interesting to do that. And then you can also take into account actually fighting enemies that are fighting to get into an area that you want to be in, or to get past areas that you need to be in. But a lot of the times, if like the cyborgs are involved, they will sort of interject themselves regardless of if you want to or not. So it is worth noting that if there are cyborgs present in an area, that shooting will alert them, which I think is fine. They're a deterrent. They're meant to do that. So I think that's all that I actually wanted to cover for today. I genuinely appreciate all the people that submitted questions to me. I hope that I answered them as specifically as I could. If you have any more questions, don't be afraid to comment them, and I will try to get to them in a new video if it makes sense to do that. If you made it this far, I genuinely appreciate you. If you like what you saw, please don't be afraid to like, comment, follow, and subscribe. I would genuinely appreciate it. Tell them, do me a favor, please don't die, and we'll see you in the next one.